I stopped the car at the traffic lights and closed my eyes for a few seconds. My joints ached from sitting behind the wheel for so long, but I needed to get out of the house. At 68, I tried not to give in to my age, even though every morning reminded me that time was relentless. The traffic light turned green, and I slowly pulled away, heading for the only decent bakery in Marysville. Our town is small, everyone knows each other, and me especially. I ran the Ebbing Construction Company for almost 40 years until I handed over the reins to my son Howard 5 years ago. And what did I get in return? Phone calls on holidays and empty promises to stop by. I parked at Doris's bakery and struggled to get out of the car. Inside, it smelled of fresh pastries and coffee. Doris, a heavy-set woman in her 50s, smiled warmly at me from behind the counter. "Rupert Ebbing. Good to see you, old man." The usual. "Good morning, Doris." "Yes, black coffee and your signature blueberry muffin." I leaned on the counter, feeling the familiar surroundings calm me a little. While Doris was preparing my order, I heard a familiar name in a conversation at the next table. "Elliot and Vanessa's anniversary is this Saturday. I hear they rented out the entire Silver Lake Lodge. Can you imagine the money?" I tensed involuntarily. Elliot is my grandson, Howard's only child. This Saturday is his and his wife's 5th wedding anniversary, and I knew nothing about it. No invitation, not even a mention in our rare conversations. "Your coffee, Mr. Ebbing." Doris placed a steaming cup in front of me. "You look pale. Are you all right?" "Yes, Doris. Just lost in thought," I said, taking the cup with trembling fingers. "Tell me, have you heard anything about the party at Silver Lake Lodge this Saturday?" Doris lowered her voice. "Oh, it's your grandson's wedding anniversary. I thought you knew. Half the town is invited. Vanessa has made it a real event." I nodded, trying to hide my disappointment. "So half the town knows, but his own grandfather doesn't." "Of course I know. I was just checking the details," I lied, sipping my hot coffee. Leaving the bakery, I got into my car but didn't rush to start the engine. Memories of little Elliot, whom I often picked up from school while Howard and his wife were building their careers, came to mind. I taught him how to hammer nails, fly a kite, and fish in the lake outside of town. When Marilyn, my wife, died of cancer 12 years ago, something broke between Howard and me. He had always been closer to his mother, and after her death, he seemed to blame me for not being able to save her. As if I hadn't done everything I could. As if I wouldn't have sold my soul to the devil to keep her with me. I slammed my hands on the steering wheel. Damn it, we're family. How could they not invite me? It must be some kind of mistake. Maybe the invitation got lost, or they think they told me on the phone. Howard sometimes forgets things like that when he's busy. On the way home, I stopped at the mall. If I'm going to my grandson's anniversary, I need to get him a decent gift. I spent a long time looking at the displays in the jewelry store until I settled on some elegant silver cufflinks for Elliot. He works in his father's office now and wears suits. The cufflinks would be perfect. "Can you add an engraving?" I asked the saleswoman. "Of course, sir." "What inscription would you like?" I thought for a moment. What could I write to a grandson I see maybe 3 times a year? "Remember your roots," I finally said. "And today's date." Choosing a gift for Vanessa proved to be more difficult. I knew almost nothing about her, except that she liked to show off her status and expensive things. After much deliberation, I settled on an elegant silver bracelet. Not too expensive, but not cheap either. Just right for a daughter-in-law with whom I am not particularly close. When I got home, I sat down in an armchair and looked at the photo of Marilyn on the mantelpiece. She was smiling that special smile that was meant only for me. "What's happening to our family, Mary?" I asked the photo. "When did we become strangers to each other?" The house was quiet. Too quiet for a place that was once filled with laughter and children's voices. After retiring, I tried to fill the void. I joined a fishing club and sometimes played poker with other old men like me. But nothing can replace family. I took out my phone and found Howard's number. My finger hovered over the call button. What would I say to him? "Why didn't you invite me?" Or would I pretend to know about the party but want to clarify the details? After a minute of hesitation, I put the phone down. "No, I'll just show up. If it's a misunderstanding, we'll laugh about it. If not, well, at least I'll know the truth." That evening, I took my best suit out of the closet. Bought when Marilyn was still alive. It was a little out of fashion, but it still fit well. I ran my hand over the dark blue fabric, remembering how my wife had helped me choose it. "This color brings out your eyes," she said, adjusting the lapels. By Saturday, I was thoroughly prepared. I got a haircut from old Phil, who has been running a barber shop in the city center for 30 years. I took the suit to the dry cleaners. I polished my best shoes until they shone. I bought some wrapping paper for the gifts and wrapped them neatly. Saturday morning was clear and cool. I woke up early as usual. Even in retirement, I couldn't shake the old habits of a builder who had to be on site by 7 in the morning. At breakfast, I reread the greeting card I had written the night before. "Dear Elliot and Vanessa, congratulations on your 5th wedding anniversary. May your love grow stronger with each passing year, and may your home always be filled with joy. With love, Grandpa Rupert." The words seemed empty and formal, but what else could I write to people I hardly knew? I sighed and put the card in an envelope. The day dragged on, painfully slowly. I tried reading, watching TV, even started sorting through old tools in the garage, but my thoughts kept returning to the upcoming evening. Why didn't they invite me? What did I do wrong? Finally, around 5 o'clock, I started getting ready. I took a shower, shaved carefully, and put on a fresh shirt and suit. I tied the tie that Elliot had given me many years ago for Father's Day. Dark burgundy with a subtle pattern. I looked at myself in the mirror. My gray hair was neatly combed, and my face, despite my age and wrinkles, looked dignified. I had always tried to keep myself in shape, and even now I went for regular walks. Before leaving, I glanced at the photo of Marilyn once more. "I'm going to visit our grandson, dear," I said, touching the glass with my fingertips. "I hope it's just a misunderstanding." But somewhere deep down, I knew that wasn't the case. Years of working with people had taught me to sense insincerity, and in my rare encounters with my son's family, there had been plenty of it. All I could do was hope that I was wrong. I grabbed the gifts, the car keys, and headed decisively for the door. Whatever happened tonight, I would face it with my head held high. The Ebbings don't hide or run away from problems. Ever. As I pulled up to Silver Lake Lodge on Saturday night, I felt the muscles in my neck tense. My old Ford looked out of place among the string of shiny Mercedes and BMWs in the parking lot. The restaurant glowed with lights like a beacon in the twilight, and employees in formal suits lined the driveway. I parked my car a short distance from the main entrance, giving myself time to collect my thoughts. It was a cool evening, and I adjusted my scarf as I got out of the car. Taking the bag of gifts, I headed for the restaurant, noting how the building had changed since my company had renovated it almost 30 years ago. Back then, it was an old boat station that we turned into a cozy establishment. Now, the facade was decorated with modern elements, but the foundation we had created was still visible in the architecture. At the entrance stood a young man in a black suit with a tablet in his hands, checking the guests' invitations. When it was my turn, I smiled politely. "Good evening." "Rupert Ebbing." The young man scanned the list, then scanned it again, more carefully. "I'm sorry, sir, but your name is not on the guest list." I had expected this, but still felt a pang of disappointment. Perhaps there has been a misunderstanding? "I am Elliot Ebbing's grandfather. Today is his 5th wedding anniversary." The young man looked embarrassed. "I understand, sir, but I have strict instructions to only let in those on the list." "Then please let my grandson know that I'm here," I said, trying to sound calm, even though I was boiling with irritation inside. While the employee was on the phone, I watched the guests arrive. I knew many of them personally, businessmen I had worked with for years, old family friends, even the mayor and his wife. Some nodded to me, but no one stopped to talk, as if I were invisible. It was a strange feeling, standing at the door of my own grandson's party like an uninvited guest. A few minutes later, Elliot appeared in the doorway. In an impeccable dark suit, with a fashionable haircut, he looked like a typical representative of the successful younger generation. But I immediately noticed the tension in his eyes and the nervous twitch of his left eyelid, a sure sign that my grandson was stressed. "Grandpa?" He approached me, looking around as if afraid that someone would see us together. "What are you doing here?" "I came to congratulate you and Vanessa," I replied, extending my hand for a handshake. "The 5th anniversary is a significant date." Elliot shook my hand, but his palm was cold and clammy. Grandpa, we weren't expecting you today, he said quietly, almost in a whisper. You rarely go out, especially in the evenings. I always find the strength for my family, I said, looking him straight in the eye. Besides, I'm not so old that I can't handle one evening at a restaurant. Elliot nervously ran his hand through his hair, a gesture he had picked up from me when he was a child. Of course, Grandpa, it's just all the seats are already taken, and the evening's program is scheduled down to the minute. Vanessa planned everything very carefully. I can just sit somewhere in the corner, I said, taking a step toward the door. I won't interfere with your program. Elliot glanced quickly over his shoulder, as if expecting someone to appear in the doorway. Grandpa, you have to understand. It's complicated. Vanessa will be upset if we disrupt her plans. I think your wife will survive Grandpa showing up at the party? I tried to smile, but it came out forced. At that moment, as if on cue, Vanessa appeared in the restaurant doorway. In an elegant silver dress, with perfect hair and makeup, she looked like she had stepped off the cover of a magazine. But when her gaze fell on me, the smile on her face became noticeably strained. "Oh, Mr. Ebbing," she exclaimed as she approached us. "What a pleasant surprise." Her voice sounded too high and too cheerful to be sincere. I immediately sensed the insincerity. Years of working with people had taught me to recognize insincerity. "Hello, Vanessa," I replied, trying to be polite. "Congratulations on your 5th anniversary." She leaned in and kissed me lightly on the cheek, a formal gesture that did nothing to hide the coldness in her eyes. "Thank you. That's very kind of you," she said, glancing quickly at Elliot. "We weren't expecting you today, but of course we're happy to see you." An elderly couple stopped next to us, old friends of the family, the Bensons. I had known them since I built their house on the outskirts of town. "Rupert!" Arthur Benson exclaimed, shaking my hand. "Long time no see, old friend. How are you?" "Not bad, Arthur," I replied, glad to see a familiar face. "How's your terrace?" "Holding up?" "Like new." "Your work is timeless," Arthur turned to Vanessa. "Miss Vanessa, you've outdone yourself. What a wonderful party." Vanessa instantly transformed, breaking into a sincere, or at least more convincing, smile. "Oh, you're too kind, Mr. Benson. Please come inside. Your seats are in the center section." As Vanessa escorted the Bensons, I noticed Elliot shifting nervously from foot to foot. "Grandpa, let me show you inside," he finally said. "Let's see where we can seat you." We entered the restaurant, and I was amazed at how the interior had been transformed. There were flowers, candles, and elegant draperies everywhere. The central hall was filled with round tables, covered with snow-white tablecloths, silver cutlery, and crystal. At the far wall was a small stage with musical equipment and microphones. "Impressive," I remarked, looking around. "It must have cost a fortune." Elliot swallowed, and I noticed his eye twitch again. Vanessa wanted everything to be perfect. 5th anniversary and all that. I wanted to ask where the young couple had gotten the money for such luxury, but I kept quiet. It wasn't the right moment for awkward questions. Elliot led me to a small table in the corner of the hall, almost hidden behind a large flower arrangement. "You can sit here for now," he said, pulling out a chair. "I'll talk to the manager. Maybe we can add another place setting at the family table." "Don't worry, I'll be fine here," I replied, placing the bag of gifts on the table. "Here, this is for you and Vanessa." Nothing special, just a small token of my appreciation. Elliot took the bag as if I had handed him a bomb. "Thank you, Grandpa. That's very kind of you." "You're welcome," I said, sitting down at the table and watching my grandson hurry away, as if afraid I would ask him to stay. Left alone, I began to look more closely at the guests. I knew most of them. Marysville isn't that big of a town. There were the Petersons, owners of a chain of pharmacies. There were the Clarks, he a lawyer, she a school teacher. There were the Richardsons, old money, who had inherited a sawmill from their parents. They were all dressed to the nines, laughing loudly and holding glasses of champagne. To my surprise, I didn't see Howard, my son and Elliot's father. Strange that he hadn't shown up yet at his own son's party. Maybe he was delayed at work? Or were he and Vanessa in as strained a relationship as he and I were? A waiter passing by with a tray of champagne stopped next to me. "Would you like a glass, sir?" "Thank you." I took the glass, took a sip, and grimaced. Too sweet for my taste. I've always preferred good whiskey. Watching the party from my secluded spot, I began to notice details that the other guests didn't see. How Vanessa tensed up slightly every time someone mentioned the cost of something. How Elliot constantly checked his phone with a worried expression on his face. How some of the decorations which looked luxurious from a distance turned out to be cheap fakes up close. At one point, I noticed Vanessa pulling the restaurant manager aside and arguing with him quietly but heatedly about something. I couldn't hear their conversation, but their body language made it clear that it was about money and that the conversation was unpleasant. Watching my sister-in-law, I realized that I knew very little about her. Elliot met her in college and they dated for about a year before getting married. Vanessa studied business administration and always seemed like an ambitious girl. After graduating from college, she got a job at a marketing agency. But as far as I knew, she left a year ago to focus on her family and personal projects. I had no idea what those projects were. My thoughts were interrupted by the loud clink of a glass. Vanessa was calling for the guests' attention. "Dear friends," she began, standing in the center of the room with a glass in her hand. "Elliot and I are so happy that you are all here today to celebrate our 5th wedding anniversary." The guests applauded, and I noticed Elliot standing next to his wife, smiling tensely. "5 years have flown by like a single day," Vanessa continued, "and each of you has played a special role in our love story. Today we are not only celebrating the past, but also looking to the future with optimism and joy." More applause. I took another sip of champagne as I watched the show. Vanessa spoke smoothly, without hesitation, like an actress who had memorized her lines. "And now I want to give the floor to my wonderful husband." "Elliot, dear, it's your turn." Elliot stepped forward, took the microphone, and I immediately noticed how his hands were shaking. My grandson never liked public speaking. "Thank you, Vanessa," he began, clearing his throat. "And thank you to everyone who came today. It, it means a lot to us." He paused, and I saw Vanessa gently nudge him with her elbow. "5 years ago, I made the best choice of my life," Elliot continued in a rehearsed tone, "and every day I am grateful to have Vanessa by my side. She makes me better, supports me in everything, and is my guiding star." The words sounded false, as if they had been written by someone else. I knew my grandson too well to believe this pompous speech. The Elliot I remembered spoke simply and sincerely, not with such hackneyed phrases. After the toast, dinner began. The waiters served exquisite dishes, and I noticed that the portions were small and the side dishes sparse. Another sign of economy hidden behind a facade of luxury. No one joined me at the table, and I felt like an outcast at this celebration of life. Several times I caught the guests looking at me, curious, sometimes sympathetic. Perhaps they knew I hadn't been invited and were now wondering how I had ended up here. In the middle of the evening, Thomas Wilson, an old business partner, with whom we had built half of the commercial buildings in Marysville, unexpectedly approached me. "Rupert, you old rascal," he exclaimed, sitting down next to me. "Why are you hiding here in the corner?" "I'm not hiding, Tom, just watching," I replied, shaking his hand. "How are you doing? Still in the construction business?" "Where else would I go?" Tom smiled. "Although now I'm more of a consultant than a builder. But your Howard seems to have switched completely to real estate. I hear Ebbing Construction isn't doing so well." I frowned. "What do you mean?" Tom lowered his voice. "Well, there are rumors that the company is delaying payments to subcontractors. And it looks like they sold that plot on River Road that you were saving for a special project." The news came as a shock to me. I bought the plot on River Road 20 years ago, planning to build a luxury residential complex there someday. When I handed the company over to Howard, we agreed that this plot would remain untouched until better times. "You must be mistaken, Tom," I said, trying to remain calm. "Howard would have told me about such serious decisions." Tom shrugged. "Maybe I am mistaken. But you know what they say, there's no smoke without fire." After Tom left, I couldn't stop thinking about his words. If the company was really in trouble, it explained a lot. The ostentatious luxury of this party, designed to hide financial problems. Elliot's strange behavior. Howard's absence. My thoughts were interrupted by the loud laughter of Vanessa, who was surrounded by guests. She was telling a story, gesturing animatedly, and everyone around her was laughing. But I noticed one of the waiters approach her and whisper something in her ear. The smile instantly disappeared from Vanessa's face, and she hastily apologized to the guests. My intuition told me that something was wrong. I cautiously got up and headed for the bar, from where I could better see where Vanessa was going. She was walking quickly toward the exit, where she was met by the restaurant manager with a folder in his hands. They stepped aside and I saw Vanessa nervously flipping through some papers, then taking out her phone and starting to call someone. "Would you like a drink, sir?" the bartender asked, distracting me. "Whiskey, please." "Double," I replied, keeping my eyes on Vanessa. She was talking on the phone, and her gestures showed that the conversation was tense. Then she handed the phone to the manager, who also began talking to someone, nodding and frowning. After receiving my whiskey, I slowly made my way back to my table, but Elliot intercepted me on the way. "Grandpa," he said, smiling nervously, "how do you like the party?" "Impressive," I replied, especially considering that according to rumors, Ebbing Construction is not going through the best of times. Elliot turned pale. "Who told you that?" "It doesn't matter." I took a sip of whiskey. "Is it true?" My grandson looked around, as if afraid that someone was listening. "Listen, Grandpa, now is not the time or place for such conversations. Maybe we can meet next week and discuss everything?" "Of course, Elliot," I nodded, realizing that this conversation, like many others promised, would never happen. "Just tell me one thing. Are you happy?" The question caught him off guard. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again, but didn't say a word. And in that silence, I saw the answer more clearly than if he had said it out loud. At that moment, Vanessa returned from her secret conversation and approached us. A smile graced her face again, but her eyes remained cold and calculating. "Elliot, dear, they're waiting for us for the next toast," she said, glancing quickly at me. "Mr. Ebbing, aren't you bored here all alone?" "Not at all," I replied. "I'm watching your wonderful celebration. I must say, you've organized everything perfectly." "Thank you," she nodded. "I wanted everything to be perfect." "And it looks perfect," I remarked, "at least at first glance." Vanessa narrowed her eyes slightly, catching the subtext in my words. "Well, I hope you continue to enjoy your evening," she said, taking Elliot by the arm. "It's time for us to return to our guests." They left and I returned to my table, feeling the pieces of the puzzle gradually falling into place in my head. The ostentatious luxury of the party, Elliot's nervousness, Howard's absence, Vanessa's strange conversation with the restaurant manager. Everything pointed to the fact that serious problems were hidden behind the perfect facade. I finished my whiskey, watching Vanessa and Elliot make another solemn toast, standing in the center of the hall in the spotlight. They smiled, hugged, and kissed to the applause of the guests, the perfect couple celebrating the perfect anniversary in the perfect setting. But now I could see cracks in that facade, and I knew that soon those cracks would turn into fissures that no amount of celebrations or smiles could hide. The evening was in full swing. The guests loosened up after a few glasses of champagne. The music got louder and the laughter got louder. I sat at my table in the corner, watching what was happening and thinking about the oddities I had noticed. Something was definitely wrong with this idyllic picture of family happiness. Suddenly, Howard, my son, appeared in the restaurant. He entered hurriedly, adjusting his tie as he walked, and immediately headed for Vanessa. They talked briefly about something, and I noticed Vanessa wave her hand irritably, while Howard lowered his head guiltily. It was interesting that my once self-confident son, who had taken over the company, now looked as if he had been reprimanded by a strict teacher. I decided to approach him. Despite our difficult relationship, he was still my son, and I wanted to at least say hello. I got up and crossed the hall, maneuvering between tables and dancing couples. Howard was standing at the bar ordering a drink when I approached him. "Hi, son," I said, touching his shoulder lightly. Howard turned around, and his face reflected genuine surprise. "Dad, what are you doing here?" "The same thing as everyone else," I replied. "Celebrating your son's anniversary." Howard looked around nervously, as if checking to see if anyone was watching us. "Listen, Dad, I didn't know you were coming." Vanessa was in charge of the invitations, and I thought, "That I wasn't on the list?" I interrupted him. "Yes, I understand. I wonder why my daughter-in-law decided that her grandfather had no place at his grandson's celebration." Howard sighed, picked up his drink, and took a big sip. "It's complicated, Dad. Vanessa has her own vision of how these events should be. She wanted everything to be Perfect, I suggested. Yes, that's what she said. Apparently, the old grandfather spoils the picture. That's not it. Howard lowered his voice. It's just that you and Vanessa have always had a strained relationship. You never approved of her. I barely know this woman, I objected. We've seen each other maybe 10 times in 5 years. How can I disapprove of someone I hardly know? Howard lowered his eyes, avoiding my gaze. She's sensitive to criticism, and you've always been blunt in your assessments. Blunt? I chuckled. Call a spade, son. I was being honest, and now I can see that all is not well with the company. Tom Wilson said you sold the River Road property. Howard raised his head sharply. Tom should keep his mouth shut. Those were business decisions necessary for... For what? I interrupted him. So you can throw ostentatious parties you can't afford? Howard's cheeks flushed with anger or shame. I couldn't tell. You don't understand, Dad. Times have changed. Now it's not just about building, it's about creating an image. Vanessa is helping us with that. And how is she helping? I asked, gesturing around the room. Is this party part of the image? And are the delays in payments to subcontractors also part of the new strategy? Howard turned pale. Who told you? It doesn't matter. I shook my head. What matters is that you didn't tell me. We're family, Howard. Or at least we used to be. At that moment, Vanessa approached us. Her smile disappeared as soon as she saw us talking. Howard, dear, she said in a sugary tone, they're waiting for you to give a toast. Oh, Mr. Ebbing, have you met our guests? Not yet, I replied. My son and I were discussing company business. Vanessa shot Howard a sharp look. Today is not the time for business talk, is it, dear? It's a celebration of love. Of course, you're right, Howard hastily agreed. Dad, sorry, I need to go, I nodded. I won't keep you. Howard quickly left, leaving me alone with Vanessa. She looked at me with poorly concealed irritation. Mr. Ebbing, she began in a quiet but firm voice, I appreciate you coming, but perhaps you would be more comfortable at home? After all, noisy parties at your age. At my age, Vanessa, you're not afraid to say what you think, I interrupted her. So let's skip the polite hints. If you want me to leave, just say so. Her eyes narrowed. Fine. I didn't want to invite you. You don't fit in with the atmosphere I've created. And to be honest, your presence here is inappropriate. Inappropriate? I felt anger boiling up inside me. I'm Elliot's grandfather, his only remaining grandfather. How can my presence be inappropriate? It's not just about family ties, Vanessa said louder, and several nearby guests turned their heads in our direction. The point is that you constantly criticize and condemn. You think everyone should live by your rules, work the way you did. But the world has changed, Mr. Ebbing. I noticed that our conversation was attracting more and more attention. People stopped dancing and talking and turned toward us. Vanessa, let's discuss this somewhere else, I suggested, lowering my voice. There's no need to cause a scene at a party. A scene? She laughed too loudly. You're the one causing a scene, showing up uninvited and interrogating my father-in-law about company business. Guests began to gather around us, among whom I noticed Elliot, watching the scene with concern. I didn't mean to ruin the party, I said calmly. I just wanted to be part of the family celebration. Family? Vanessa laughed again, but now there was anger in her laughter. You've ignored this family for years. How many times have you come over for dinner? How many times have you called just to ask how we were doing? And now you suddenly remember your family ties? I wanted to argue, to say that I had called regularly, that they were the ones who avoided meeting, but Vanessa didn't let me get a word in. You know what I think? She continued, raising her voice even more. I think you just got lonely in your big empty house and decided to impose on us. But guess what? We're happy without you. We have our own lives, our own family, and there's no room in it for a grumpy old man who does nothing but criticize. The room fell silent. The music was still playing, but no one was dancing or talking. All eyes were on us. Vanessa, please, Elliot intervened, approaching his wife. Let's not... No, Elliot, she snapped. I've kept quiet for too long. Your grandfather always looked down on me, always thought I wasn't good enough for your family. Well, Mr. Ebbing, she turned to me, I'm going to tell you the truth. You're not invited to this party. You were never invited. I felt the color of shame rush to my face. Standing there in front of all the guests and hearing the wife of my own grandson humiliate me was more painful than I could have imagined. Vanessa, my voice was quiet but firm. You are entitled to your opinion, but publicly humiliating a man who has simply come to congratulate his grandson is crossing the line. Boundaries? She grabbed a glass of champagne from the table. Here's the boundary, Mr. Ebbing. You're not invited. Leave. And before anyone could react, Vanessa splashed champagne in my face. The cold liquid ran down my cheeks, soaking into my shirt collar and jacket lapels. There were gasps of astonishment from the guests. Some gasped, some whispered. I stood there, numb with shock and humiliation, feeling the drops of champagne running down my chin. Vanessa! Elliot exclaimed, looking at her in horror. What are you doing? What I should have done a long time ago, she replied, laughing loudly. Showing him his place. I slowly took a handkerchief out of my pocket and wiped my face. My hands were shaking slightly, but I tried to remain calm. I looked for Howard, my son, hoping he would intervene, say something. But Howard stood aside, his eyes downcast, as if studying the pattern on the carpet. You're not invited. Leave, Vanessa repeated, still holding the empty glass. You don't belong here. I slowly scanned the room. Dozens of eyes were looking at me, with pity, curiosity, awkwardness. But no one stood up for me. No one said a word in my defense. Even my own son and grandson were silent, paralyzed by fear or shame. Well, I finally said, putting the handkerchief back in my pocket. I understand. Thank you for the explanation, Vanessa. I turned to leave, but then stopped and looked at her again. Just remember, you shouldn't have done that. Or what? She snorted mockingly. What are you going to do, old man? Nothing, I replied calmly. Just remember my words. I turned and headed for the exit, feeling the eyes of everyone present on me. My back was straight, my head held high. The Ebbings know how to maintain their dignity even in the most humiliating situations. Passing by Elliot, I paused for a moment. I loved you from day one, grandson, and I always will. But today you disappointed me. Elliot opened his mouth as if to say something, but didn't utter a word. His eyes showed a mixture of shame and fear. Fear of his wife, who controlled every aspect of his life. I reached the restaurant door when Vanessa's voice rang out behind me. Old man, don't you get it? Leave now. Without turning around, I stepped out into the cool evening air. The staff at the entrance pretended not to notice, but I could see in their eyes that they had heard every word. I walked slowly to my car, feeling the night breeze chill my champagne-soaked clothes. Inside, a storm of emotions raged. Resentment, anger, disappointment, shame. But most of all, a deep, piercing pain from the betrayal of those closest to me. I got into the car but didn't start the engine right away. I just sat there for a few minutes, looking at the lit-up restaurant building where the party continued as if nothing had happened. Perhaps that's how it was for them. An unpleasant incident that would quickly be forgotten, washed away by new glasses of champagne and cheerful music. But for me, that evening changed everything. I saw my family's true colors, and they were ugly. They chose money, status, and a false facade over real relationships. They allowed this woman to control them, to dictate who to love and who to reject. I started the engine and slowly drove out of the parking lot. On the way home, my thoughts revolved around one question. How did we get to this point? When did the gap between us become so deep that even the most basic family ties ceased to mean anything? At home, the first thing I did was take off my champagne-soaked suit and shirt. The jacket was probably ruined. Champagne leaves stubborn stains. It was a shame as it was my best suit, one with which I had so many memories. I took a shower, washing away not only the sticky traces of the drink, but also as if trying to wash away the humiliation of the evening. After changing into my home clothes, I sat down in an armchair in the living room, feeling empty and tired. My gaze fell on my phone, and I suddenly remembered that a few days ago I had received a new credit card statement, but hadn't looked at it yet. I usually did that right away, but lately I had become less attentive to such things. I found the envelope in the pile of mail on the table and opened it. Looking through the list of transactions, I suddenly came across several large charges that I didn't remember. One was at the Silver Lake Lodge restaurant for a hefty amount, another was at an event planning company, and the third was at a flower shop. They were all dated last month. It was like a punch in the gut. I reread the statement several times, not believing my eyes. All the payments for today's party were made with my credit card. But how? I never gave my card to Elliot, let alone Vanessa. And then I remembered. About a year ago, Elliot asked me to help him buy tools for some home project. I gave him my card, and he promised to return it in a couple of days, which he did. But apparently he had managed to record all the details during that time. I felt a wave of anger rising inside me. Not only did they not invite me to the party, they paid for it with my money. And then they publicly humiliated me when I dared to show up. With trembling hands, I dialed the bank's number. After a short conversation with a customer service representative, they confirmed what I already knew. All the charges had been made online using my card details. I explained the situation and demanded that the payments be canceled as unauthorized. "Of course, Mr. Ebbing," replied the employee. "We will initiate a refund procedure. It usually takes 3 to 5 business days. Would you also like to block your card and issue a new one?" "Yes, please," I replied. "And I want to file a formal complaint about the fraudulent use of my card." "You'll have to go to the police to file a report," the representative warned. "Are you prepared to do that?" I thought about it. Filing a police report meant officially accusing my own grandson of fraud. Was I ready to go that far? "Let's put that question aside for now," I decided. "Let's cancel the payments and block the card first." After the conversation ended, I leaned back in my chair, feeling a strange mixture of satisfaction and bitterness. On the one hand, I had taken action and was no longer a passive victim. On the other hand, the very necessity of such actions was painful. How had we gotten to the point where I had to cancel payments and block cards to protect myself from my own family? I imagined what was happening in the restaurant right now. Perhaps the party was continuing as if nothing had happened. Or maybe the manager had already received notification of the payment cancellation and had turned to Vanessa for an explanation. What would she say? How would she get out of this situation? Before I could finish this thought, the phone rang. Elliot's number appeared on the screen. I hesitated whether to answer, but then decided I wanted to hear what he had to say. "Yes," I said, picking up the phone. "Grandpa," Elliot's voice sounded panicked. "What's going on?" "The restaurant manager just said that all payments have been canceled. They're threatening to call the police." "Really?" I tried to sound calm. "What happened to the payments?" "I don't know. They say the cardholder revoked the funds. But that's some kind of mistake, right?" "No, Elliot, it's not a mistake," I replied. "I canceled the payments because they were made without my knowledge or consent." There was a pause. I could hear voices, music, and some noise in the background. "Grandpa, you canceled the payments for our anniversary?" Elliot's voice sounded incredulous. "But why?" "Because I didn't give permission to use my card," I replied. "You or Vanessa took my details without asking and spent my money. And then you kicked me out when I came to the party that I paid for myself." "But Grandpa, that's not true," Elliot exclaimed. "I thought you knew. Dad said you agreed to help with the payment as a gift to us. So Howard is involved in this too. No wonder he avoided me all evening." "Your father lied," I said. "I didn't know anything about it. And judging by Vanessa's reaction, she knew perfectly well that I hadn't given my consent." "Grandpa, please!" Elliot's voice sounded desperate. "This is some kind of misunderstanding." "Let's talk about it. You can't just cancel the payments. What are we supposed to do now?" "I don't know, Elliot. Maybe start with an apology or an explanation of why you decided you could use my money without asking." There was some rustling on the line, and then I heard Vanessa's voice. "Mr. Ebbing, this is going too far. You're deliberately trying to ruin our party. Reverse the payments immediately, or else." "Or else what, Vanessa?" I asked. "Douse me with champagne again? Or the whole restaurant this time?" "You don't understand the position you're putting us in," she almost shouted. "All our friends are here. Howard's colleagues, important business partners." "This is a disaster." "I'm afraid this is your disaster, not mine," I replied. "You used my card without permission. That's called fraud, Vanessa. And I have every right to cancel these payments." "I'll call you back," she said, clearly trying to contain her anger. "We'll figure this out some other way." The phone went dead. and I sat in the silence of my living room. A strange sense of satisfaction mingled with deep sadness. I didn't want this rift with my family, but they brought it on themselves with their actions. The phone rang again, but this time I didn't answer. Let them deal with their own problems. I made my move, and now the ball was in their court. I got up and walked to the window, looking out at the dark street. Somewhere out there, at Silver Lake Lodge, my family was trying to salvage a holiday that had turned into a disaster. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was in control. They thought they could use me and discard me when I became inconvenient. But today they learned that old Rupert Abing hadn't said his last word yet. The morning after the scandal at the restaurant was surprisingly clear. The sun flooded my bedroom, as if mocking the heaviness inside. I had hardly slept, replaying the events of last night in my head. The humiliation I had experienced was too vivid in my mind. Vanessa splashing champagne in my face. Elliot's silence. Howard's averted gaze. And then the discovery that it had all been paid for with my credit card without my knowledge. I sat on the edge of the bed, stretching my stiff neck. At my age, sleepless nights are especially difficult. My head was buzzing, but my determination remained. Last night, I took the first step. I canceled the payments for the party. Today, I had to make sure that the cancellation had actually gone through and deal with the consequences. I went down to the kitchen, put the kettle on, and took out my phone. 5 missed calls from Elliot, 3 from Howard, and 8 from an unknown number, which I suspected belonged to Vanessa. Not a single voicemail. Typical. They need something from me, but they can't even leave a message explaining the situation. I called the bank to make sure the payment cancellation process had been initiated. A pleasant female voice confirmed that everything was in order. Mr. Ebbing, the refund process has been initiated. It usually takes 3 to 5 business days, but in your case, given the circumstances, we will try to expedite the process. Thank you, I replied. What about the new card? It will be ready by the end of the week. Can we deliver it to you by courier, or would you prefer to pick it up at the branch? Better deliver it, I said. At my age, I didn't want to go into town unnecessarily. No sooner had I finished the call than the phone rang again. An unknown number appeared on the screen, the same one that had called me 8 times during the night. I hesitated, but then decided to answer. It was time to hear what Vanessa had to say. Hello? I said, trying to keep my voice calm. Mr. Ebbing. Finally, Vanessa's voice sounded on the verge of hysteria. Why didn't you answer my calls? It was late, Vanessa. People usually sleep at night, I replied. Do you realize what you've done? She wasn't listening to me. The restaurant is threatening to sue us. They're demanding full payment for the evening, plus damages for ruining the event. It's thousands of dollars. That's an unpleasant situation, I agreed. But what does it have to do with me? What does it have to do with you? Vanessa was almost shouting. You canceled the payments. You caused this whole nightmare. No, Vanessa, I said quietly but firmly. You caused this nightmare. You took my credit card without permission. You used it to pay for a party I wasn't even invited to. And when I did show up, you publicly humiliated me by pouring champagne on me. So the problem isn't my actions, it's yours. There was silence on the other end of the line. I could almost see Vanessa trying to control herself, realizing that shouting wouldn't help. Listen, Mr. Ebbing, her voice became unctuous. I admit I overreacted yesterday. It's unforgivable, and I sincerely apologize. I was on edge. Organizing the party is so stressful. But what you did with the payments isn't a solution to the problem. It just creates new problems for all of us. For all of us, I asked. Or for you, Vanessa? I don't think Elliot and Howard knew you were using my card without permission. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been so shocked when the payments were canceled. It was a misunderstanding, she said quickly. Howard thought you had given permission, and I thought he had cleared it with you. Don't lie to me. I felt anger rising inside me. You knew perfectly well that I didn't know anything about these payments. That's why you didn't want me to come to the party. You were afraid I'd find out the truth. Fine, she blurted out unexpectedly. Yes, I knew. But what else could I do? We didn't have the money for a celebration, and the 5th anniversary is an important date. I couldn't let people think we couldn't throw a decent party. So instead of throwing a party within our means, You decided to steal my money? I asked bluntly. I didn't steal it, Vanessa protested. I was going to pay it all back. I just needed time to… To what? I interrupted. To find another old man to fleece? That's not fair. Her voice took on a hysterical tone again. You don't understand the situation we're in. The company is barely staying afloat. We're in debt, and we need to maintain a certain image. Otherwise, we'll lose all our contracts and all our clients. I sighed. So things were even worse than I had thought. The company I had built over 40 years was now on the verge of bankruptcy. And instead of honestly acknowledging the problems and looking for solutions, they preferred to create the appearance of prosperity at my expense. Vanessa, I said after a pause, I'm not going to refund the payments. You used my card without permission, and now you're responsible for the consequences. That's called adult life. But what about the restaurant? The guests? Our reputation? She raised her voice again. Those are your problems, not mine. Ha, I replied. Maybe it's time to stop pretending and start living within your means. You can't do this to us, Vanessa shouted. We're family. Family? I couldn't help but smile. That's strange to hear from someone who publicly humiliated me yesterday and kicked me out of the party. When you need my money, we suddenly become family? I already apologized for yesterday. Her voice sounded desperate. What else do you want from me? Nothing, Vanessa. Absolutely nothing, I replied calmly. You have your life, I have mine. I won't interfere in your affairs, and I expect the same from you. But the money, this conversation is over, I interrupted her. Don't call me again. I pressed the end button and put the phone down on the table. My hands were shaking slightly. From anger or nervous tension, I couldn't tell. The conversation with Vanessa left a bad taste in my mouth. She felt no real remorse, only concern about the consequences of her actions. Money, reputation, the image of a successful couple. That's what mattered to her. Not relationships, not respect, not family ties. I hadn't finished my tea when the phone rang again. This time it was Elliot. I hesitated but decided to answer. After all, he was my grandson, my only grandson. Maybe he would have the courage to admit his mistake and sincerely apologize. Grandpa? Elliot's voice sounded tired and depressed. Can we talk? Of course, Elliot, I replied, trying not to betray my excitement. I'm listening. Grandpa, I don't know where to start, he stammered. What happened yesterday? It's terrible. I should have stood up for you, but I chickened out. His words sounded sincere, and I felt some of the tension ease. At least Elliot realized he was at fault. Yes, you should have, I agreed. But this isn't just about last night. Elliot, how did my credit card end up in Vanessa's possession? There was a long pause. Grandpa, I gave her the details, Elliot finally admitted. Remember a year ago when you lent me your card to buy some tools? I wrote down the details, thinking I might need to buy something else for the house. And instead you decided to use it to pay for a luxury vacation? I asked, feeling a wave of disappointment wash over me. No. I mean, not exactly, Elliot spoke quickly, as if afraid I would hang up. Vanessa found the details in my desk. She said she wanted to place a small order at an online store and needed a card. I gave her your details, thinking it was just a couple $100, no more. I was going to pay you back with my next paycheck. And then? I tried to keep my voice steady. Then she said she had already paid for the restaurant and decorations for the anniversary. I was in shock, Grandpa. We had a big fight, but it was done. She convinced me that everything would be fine, that we would pay it back before you noticed. And you agreed to that? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You let her use money she stole from me for a party I wasn't even invited to? I know it sounds awful, Elliot's voice trembled, but you have no idea how much pressure she was putting on me. Everything had to be perfect. Everyone had to see what a successful couple we were. And besides, we really were going to pay the money back. We had a plan. What plan, Elliot? I asked, already guessing the answer. Dad said there would be a big deal soon. The sale of the River Road property was supposed to bring in enough to cover all the debts and pay you back. So Tom was right. They really did sell the property I was saving for a special project. And apparently the money had already been spent or promised to creditors. Elliot, I said after a pause, I'm disappointed. Not only that you took my money without asking, but also how you behaved afterwards. If you had come to me, confessed, and apologized, I might have understood. But instead, you continued to lie, excluded me from your life, and when I finally showed up, you allowed Vanessa to humiliate me in front of everyone. I know, Grandpa, and I have no excuse. Elliot's voice sounded sincerely remorseful. But please, give us a chance to make it right. We'll find a way to get the money back, I swear, and I will personally offer you my deepest apologies. What about Vanessa? I asked. Is she ready to apologize too? For real, not because she wants my money? Elliot fell silent, and in that silence was the answer. Vanessa felt no sincere remorse. To her, I was just a rich old man who could be taken advantage of when necessary. Grandpa, she's very upset right now, Elliot finally said. The restaurant is threatening legal action. Guests are calling and asking what happened. What are you telling them? I asked. That your grandfather refused to pay for a party he wasn't invited to? No, of course not, Elliot exclaimed. We're saying there was a mistake with the payment, a technical problem. Another lie, I sighed. Elliot, when will you stop hiding behind fabrications and face the truth? Your life is built on lies and pretense. You pretend to be a successful couple, even though the company is on the verge of bankruptcy. You throw lavish parties with stolen money. You smile at people you despise behind their backs. Grandpa, I'm not like that. Elliot's voice sounded hurt. I'm just confused. I let Vanessa make too many decisions. But I'll fix it, I promise. Words, Elliot, I said wearily. Those are just words. I need actions. Real, sincere actions that show you're truly sorry and want to change. What can I do? He asked. Tell me and I'll do anything. I thought about it. What did I want from my grandson? Humiliation? Punishment? No, nothing like that. I just wanted him to be the honest person I had raised him to be. I wanted him to find the strength to resist Vanessa's toxic influence and start living a real life, not a fake one. I can't tell you what to do, Elliot, I finally replied. You're an adult and you have to make your own decisions. But I will say that the cancellation of payments remains in effect. I will not pay for a party to which I was not invited and from which I was kicked out. Grandpa, please, Elliot's voice sounded desperate. At least think about it. We're in a terrible situation, a situation you created yourself, I reminded him, and now you have to find a way out of it yourself. It's called taking responsibility for your actions. After that conversation, the phone didn't stop ringing. Howard called. Vanessa called again, even some unfamiliar numbers, possibly the restaurant or the party organizers. I didn't answer. Enough had been said, and now I needed time to process what had happened and decide how to move forward. By evening, I turned off the sound on my phone and sat down in an armchair with a book I had been meaning to read for a long time. But the words didn't form sentences, and my thoughts kept returning to the events of the last 2 days. How did we get to this point? When did my closest friends and family become strangers, ready to use me for money and status? I remembered Marilyn, my late wife. She would have known what to say and what to do. She always knew how to find the right words to heal family wounds. But she had been gone for 12 years, and with each passing year, the family we had built together was falling apart more and more. As night fell, I finally checked my phone. 23 missed calls and a dozen messages. I started reading them, one by one. Grandpa, please call back. We need to talk. Elliot. Rupert, you're making a mistake. Let's discuss this like adults. Howard. Mr. Ebbing, I sincerely apologize for my behavior. Please, let's resolve the payment issue. Vanessa, and so on in the same vein. Apologies, please. Attempts to play on guilt. But not one message contained genuine remorse, a true understanding of what they had done. For them, the problem was not their actions, but mine. That I had canceled the payments and put them in an awkward position. The last message was from Vanessa, sent just an hour ago. Mr. Ebbing, I didn't want to say this, but you're leaving us no choice. If you don't reinstate the payments, we will be forced to seek legal counsel. What you are doing could be classified as financial abuse of a family. Think about that. I couldn't help but laugh. Financial abuse? I should be accusing them of fraud and theft, not the other way around. But it was typical of Vanessa to turn the situation around to make herself look like the victim. I turned off my phone completely. Enough drama for today. Tomorrow would be a new day, and I would think about how to proceed. But one thing I knew for sure, I would no longer allow myself to be used, not for money nor to maintain a false facade of family well-being. Going up to the bedroom, I took an old photo album out of the dresser drawer. Leafing through the pages of yellowed photographs, I remembered how we used to be, a happy family without pretense or lies, Marilyn laughing at a picnic, little Howard on my shoulders, Elliot taking his first steps, supported by his grandmother. What happened to those people? When did money and status become more important to them than sincere relationships? And is there a chance to get back what was lost? I closed the album and put it back in the drawer. There were no answers to these questions now. But one thing I knew for sure, I would no longer answer their calls until I saw real change. Until I understood that they needed me, not my money or status. With that thought, I went to bed, feeling a strange sense of relief for the first time in a long time. It was as if I had thrown off a heavy burden that I had been carrying for years without realizing its weight. The burden of illusions about a family that had long since ceased to exist. A week had passed since the ill-fated anniversary. I deliberately isolated myself from the outside world. I didn't answer calls, didn't check my email, didn't even read the newspapers. I needed time to recover from everything that had happened, time to comprehend the betrayal of those closest to me and decide how to move on. On Thursday morning, I finally emerged from my voluntary seclusion. I needed to stock up on groceries, and sitting within four walls was becoming unbearable. I chose a supermarket on the outskirts of Marysville, hoping to avoid running into anyone I knew. But in a small town, it's impossible to go unnoticed. Rupert? Rupert Ebbing, is that you? I heard as I was selecting bread. I turned and saw Margaret Collins, the widow of my old friend and business partner. We hadn't seen each other in several years since I had retired. Margaret, I tried to smile. How are you? Not bad for my age, she looked at me intently. But you look tired. Is everything okay? I've been better, I replied honestly. Margaret nodded understandingly. I heard about what happened at your grandson's anniversary. What a terrible story, I tensed up. So the news had already spread around town. What exactly did you hear? I asked cautiously. Margaret looked around as if checking to see if anyone was listening, and lowered her voice. They say Vanessa made a real scene. She kicked you out of the party, threw champagne at you? Is that true? I nodded, feeling the color of shame rise to my cheeks. It's one thing to endure humiliation, but it's quite another to learn that the whole town is gossiping about it. And then you got your revenge by canceling all the payments for the party, and they ended up owing the restaurant a huge amount of money, Margaret continued. They say it was a real scandal. Vanessa yelled at the manager, threatened to take them to court, and then they all almost got arrested. What? I was stunned. Arrested? Margaret nodded with the look of someone who had exclusive information. The restaurant manager called the police when Vanessa refused to pay. Of course, it didn't come to arrest, but it was very awkward. All the guests saw the police talking to your son and grandson. Some even recorded it on their phones. I closed my eyes for a moment, imagining the scene. Police in a restaurant. Shocked guests filming the incident. A nightmare for such a small town where reputation means everything. Rupert, Margaret touched my hand. I'm not judging you. After what they did to you, they deserved a lesson. John would have supported you. John Collins was a straightforward man who couldn't stand dishonesty and betrayal. He would have stood by me. Thank you, Margaret, I said sincerely. It's nice to know that not everyone thinks I'm a spiteful old man out to get my own family. Vanessa is trying to make it look that way, Margaret snorted. But most people in town know you too well to believe that nonsense. You built half of Marysville, Rupert. People remember how much you've done for the town. We talked a little more about town news, then said goodbye. I finished my shopping and returned to my car, thinking about what I had heard. The police at the restaurant. Apparently the situation had gotten out of hand after I left, and now Vanessa was trying to pin all the blame on me, portraying herself as an innocent victim. As I pulled up to the house, I noticed a familiar car in the driveway. Howard's black Audi. So my son had decided to pay a visit after a week of unsuccessfully trying to reach me by phone. I felt my heart begin to beat faster. I wasn't ready for this meeting, but there was no turning back. I parked, grabbed the grocery bags, and headed for the house. Howard was sitting on the porch, tapping his foot nervously on the step. When he saw me, he stood up. "Dad," he said, taking a step toward me. "Finally." "Howard," I nodded, walking past him to the door. "Would you like to come in?" We entered the house. I went into the kitchen, put the bags on the table, and began unpacking the groceries without looking at my son. He stood in the doorway, clearly unsure of how to start the conversation. "Would you like some coffee?" I asked, breaking the awkward silence. "Yes, thank you." He walked over to the table and sat down. "Dad, we need to talk." "I'm listening," I replied, putting the kettle on. Howard took a deep breath, as if gathering his thoughts. "First of all, I want to apologize for what happened at the anniversary party. The way Vanessa treated you was unforgivable. I should have intervened, but—" I was taken aback. "Taken aback," I repeated, taking out the cups. "That's an interesting word for a situation where your wife is being publicly humiliated and you stand by silently." Howard looked down. "I know it sounds pathetic, but it all happened so fast and I didn't expect Vanessa to go that far." "What did you expect?" I asked, turning to him. "That she would be happy to see the man whose credit card she used without permission? The man she deliberately didn't invite to the party? I thought you and Vanessa could be polite to each other for at least one evening," Howard replied. "For Elliot's sake." "Polite," I smirked. "Is splashing champagne in someone's face rude, in your opinion?" "It's humiliation, Howard. Intentional, public humiliation." The kettle boiled, and I started making coffee, giving myself time to calm down. Howard was silent, watching my movements. "Anyway," he finally said, "we're in a very difficult situation. The restaurant is demanding full payment, plus compensation for the inconvenience. That's almost double the original amount." "And you came here so I could pay that bill?" I asked bluntly, placing a cup of coffee in front of him. "Not exactly." Howard took a sip, avoiding my gaze. "I came here so we could find a compromise. A family compromise." "Interesting." I sat down opposite him. "And what compromise do you propose?" Howard put down his cup and looked at me seriously. "I propose the following. You return the payments for the restaurant and decorations, and Elliot and I will cover the additional expenses and compensation. It's fair considering the circumstances." "Fair?" I shook my head. "You use my credit card without permission, throw a party I'm not invited to, allow Vanessa to publicly humiliate me, and then offer to let me pay part of the expenses as a compromise? In what world is that fair, Howard?" "Dad, you have to understand," Howard leaned forward. "We're in a tough financial situation. The company is teetering on the brink of bankruptcy. We sold the River Road property, but the proceeds were barely enough to pay off our most persistent creditors. We just don't have the funds right now." "And do I?" I asked. "I'm retired, Howard. I live on a fixed income and the savings I've put away over a lifetime. Why should I spend it on your whims?" "Because we're family," he replied. "Family supports each other in difficult times." "Family," I said with a bitter smile. It's strange to hear that word from a man who allowed his daughter-in-law to humiliate his own father and didn't say a word in his defense. Howard sighed and rubbed his forehead as if he were getting a migraine. "Listen, Dad, I know we've screwed up big time, but do you really want this to turn into an even bigger scandal? The restaurant is threatening to sue. Vanessa has already said too much to the police. If it goes to court, all our dirty family secrets will be out in the open." "Is that what you want?" "What do you want, Howard?" I asked, looking him straight in the eye. "For me to keep paying your bills while you destroy the company I've been building for 40 years? That I pretend everything is fine, even when I'm being publicly humiliated?" "I want us to solve this problem as a family," he replied. "No police, no courts, no gossip." "How noble." I couldn't help being sarcastic. "What about Vanessa? Does she want to settle this peacefully too? I hear she's telling the whole town what a petty, vindictive old man I am." Howard lowered his eyes, and I knew I had hit a nerve. "Vanessa is emotional, you know. She's upset and scared. That's no excuse, but it explains her behavior." "And your behavior, Howard? What's the explanation for that?" I looked at my son, trying to see the boy I had raised, but all I saw was a tired, broken man, entangled in his own lies and mistakes. I wasn't proud of myself that night, he said quietly, and I'm not proud now. I should have protected you, intervened when Vanessa started screaming, but I was afraid of a scandal, afraid that the guests would see us for who we really are. Pathetic, debt-ridden people pretending to be successful. His words rang with a sincerity I hadn't expected to hear. Perhaps, deep down, Howard was still the boy I knew, honest, though weak. Why didn't you come to me sooner? I asked. Why didn't you tell me about the company's problems, about the debts? I would have helped, you know. I know, Howard nodded. But I wanted to prove that I could handle it myself, to continue your work, to preserve your legacy. Instead, I ruined everything. We sat in silence, each lost in our own thoughts. Rain began to fall outside the window, the drops drumming on the glass, creating a melancholic backdrop to our conversation. What's happening with the company? I finally asked. How bad is it? Howard sighed heavily. Very bad. The market has changed, competition has increased, and I couldn't adapt. We're losing customers and delaying payments to subcontractors. The bank is threatening to withdraw our line of credit. If that happens, we'll be bankrupt within a month. What about the River Road property? How much did you get for it? Less than it's worth, Howard admitted. The real estate market isn't at its peak right now. But we had no choice. The lenders demanded immediate payment. And with all that going on, you decided to throw a lavish party at the most expensive restaurant in town? I couldn't hide my bewilderment. Howard ran his hand through his hair, a gesture he had picked up from me when we were children. It was Vanessa's idea. She said we had to maintain the image of a successful family, otherwise we would lose our last clients. That no one would want to do business with a company on the verge of bankruptcy. And you agreed to use my credit card for this charade? I asked, feeling anger boiling up inside me again. No, Howard exclaimed. I mean, I knew Elliot had given Vanessa your details, but I thought it was a small amount. By the time I found out the truth, it was too late. Everything had been paid for, the contract signed. And instead of confessing and apologizing, you decided to hide everything from me, I concluded. You didn't invite me to the party, hoping I wouldn't find out about the write-offs before the end of the month. And when I did show up, you let Vanessa kick me out. Howard was silent, and his silence spoke louder than any words. Dad, I don't know what else to say, except that I'm very sorry, he finally said. I know I let you down. I let the family down. I let myself down. But now I've come to ask not only for financial help, but also for a chance to make things right. Make things right? I looked at him skeptically. What exactly do you want to make right, Howard? The company? Family relationships? Your reputation in town? Everything, he met my gaze. But I want to start with us. With our relationship. I know that after Mom died, we grew apart. I blamed you for not being able to save her, even though I knew it was unfair. I was jealous of your success and wanted to prove that I was worth something too. And in the end, I destroyed everything you had built. His words touched something deep inside me. For the first time in a long time, I saw before me not a business-like businessman playing the role of a successful heir, but my son, vulnerable, confused, but sincere. What about Vanessa? I asked. Does she want to repair our relationship too? Howard paused, and in that pause was the answer. Vanessa is a complicated person, he finally said. She grew up in a family where status and appearance meant everything. For her, being successful isn't just about having money, but about showing everyone that you have money. When the company started to struggle, she took it as a personal defeat. Elliot's anniversary was a way for her to prove to everyone that we were doing well. At my expense, I remarked. Yes, and it's unforgivable, Howard agreed. But I'm asking you to try to understand her motives, even if you can't accept her actions. Understand? I felt irritation rising inside me. Howard, she publicly humiliated me, poured champagne on me, kicked me out of the party, and now she's spreading dirty rumors about me all over town. What exactly am I supposed to understand about that? Howard didn't have an answer, and we fell silent again. The rain intensified, drumming on the roof and windows, as if to emphasize the tension of the moment. What is Vanessa saying about me? I finally asked. I've heard bits and pieces of gossip, but I want to know the truth. Howard looked uncomfortable. Dad, it's just emotions. She's upset and scared. What is she saying, Howard? I insisted. He sighed. She says you're a vindictive, selfish old man who can't accept that he no longer controls the company and the family. That you deliberately caused a scene at the anniversary to get attention, and then you canceled the payments to humiliate us in front of the whole town. I shook my head, amazed at the extent of her distortion of reality. And people believe this nonsense? Some do, Howard replied honestly, but most know you too well. They remember how much you've done for the city, how honestly you've conducted your business all these years. I thought about it. So my reputation, earned through decades of honest work, had withstood Vanessa's barrage of lies. That was some consolation. Howard, I said after a pause, I'm not going to return the payments for the restaurant. Not because I want to punish you or disgrace you in front of the town. It's because it would be wrong. You can't use someone else's money without permission and then expect to get away with it. Howard lowered his head. I understand, he said quietly. I would have done the same thing in your place. But, I continued, I'm willing to help the company. Not with money, but with my experience and connections. If you really want to save Ebbing Construction, I can come back as a consultant, help you deal with the debts, restructure the business, and regain the trust of customers and contractors. Howard looked at me in surprise. Are you serious? After everything we've done? The company bears our family name, I replied. It represents 40 years of my life, and I don't want it all to disappear. But I have conditions. What are they? Howard sat up straight, hope appearing in his eyes. First, complete transparency. No secrets, no lies. I want to see all the financial reports, all the contracts, all the debts. Second, Vanessa does not interfere in the company's affairs. No representational expenses, no ostentatious events. We work, we don't play at being a successful business. And third, you publicly refute the lies Vanessa spreads about me. Howard hesitated, and I could see the struggle in his eyes between hope for the company's salvation and fear of Vanessa's reaction. I'm not asking you to choose between your wife and your father, I said, seeing his doubts. I'm asking you to choose between lies and truth. Between ostentatious success and real recovery. Vanessa will be against it, Howard finally said, especially the public retraction. She will never admit she was wrong. Then you'll have to do it without her consent, I said firmly. That's the price of my help, Howard. I won't work with people who discredit my name. My son took a deep breath, as if preparing to dive into cold water. Okay, Dad. I agree to your terms. All three of them. Are you sure? I looked at him intently. This won't be easy. Neither rebuilding the company nor confronting Vanessa. I'm sure, Howard nodded. The company is more important than pride. And you're right. It's time to stop living a lie. We shook hands, sealing the agreement. At that moment, I felt a strange mixture of emotions. Relief that we had found a way forward, wariness of the difficulties ahead, and a deep, piercing realization that my family saw me primarily as a source of funds and a means of solving problems, rather than a person worthy of respect and love simply for who I am. Howard finished his coffee and stood up. I'll have all the documents and reports ready by tomorrow. When can you come to the office? At 10 in the morning, I replied. And Howard, don't forget the third condition. The sooner you refute Vanessa's lies, the better. I remember, he nodded. I'll do it today. After Howard left, I sat in the kitchen for a long time, staring out the window at the rain. I agreed to help save the company, but I wasn't sure if I could save my family. There were too many lies, too much betrayal. I knew Vanessa would never accept me, would never see me as anything but an obstacle to her ambitions. And Howard would always be torn between loyalty to his wife and duty to his father. For the first time, I truly realized the bitter truth. To my family, I was not a person with feelings and dignity, but a means to an end, a source of money when they needed it, a repository of knowledge and connections when the company was in danger, but not a father, not a grandfather, not a person who was loved simply for being who he was. This realization was painful, but at the same time liberating. Now I could see the situation clearly, without illusions or false hopes. and I could start building my life based on this truth, however bitter it might be. 3 weeks had passed since my last meeting with Howard. I didn't return to the Ebbing construction office, nor did I answer any of his calls. An inner voice told me that it was time to finally turn this page of my life. I had given 50 years to the company, my family, and building a reputation in the city. What did I get in return? Betrayal from those closest to me, humiliation, and the realization that to them I was just a wallet, not a person with feelings and dignity. I woke up on Tuesday morning with unusual determination. I took a shower, shaved carefully, and put on my best everyday suit. Today was an important day. I was going to visit Henry Bishop, my old friend and lawyer, to make the final changes to my will. As I drove to his office in downtown Marysville, my thoughts replayed the events of the past month. Elliot's wedding anniversary, Vanessa's champagne in my face, the discovery of my stolen credit card, the conversation with Howard. Each memory was painful, but not as acute as before. It was like a wound that was beginning to heal, leaving a scar. Henry met me in his office, a spacious room with oak furniture and walls covered with diplomas and photographs. We had known each other for almost 40 years, and he was one of the few people I trusted unconditionally. "Rupert, it's good to see you," he said, shaking my hand firmly. "How are you feeling?" "Better than could be expected," I replied, sitting down in a chair opposite his desk. "I've come to a final decision about the will." Henry nodded and took out a folder with documents. "Are you sure?" he asked seriously. "Completely excluding Howard and Elliot is a serious step." "Absolutely sure," my voice sounded firm. "They showed their true feelings towards me. I don't want everything I've earned to go to people who see me only as a source of money after I die." Henry looked at me thoughtfully. "Who do you want to leave your estate to?" I already had my answer ready. 80% of the funds will go to creating an educational fund for young builders. Scholarships, grants for education, support for talented young people who want to develop the construction industry. I want to divide the remaining 20% between the local hospital and the library. Marilyn spent her last days in the hospital, and the staff was very attentive to her, and she volunteered at the library for 10 years. Henry nodded as he wrote down my wishes. "A noble decision, Rupert. I'm sure Marilyn would approve." We spent almost 2 hours discussing the details and signing the documents. When it was all over, I felt a strange sense of relief, as if a heavy burden had been lifted from my shoulders. "What are you planning to do next?" Henry asked as he walked me out. "I haven't decided yet," I admitted. "For the first time in many years, I have no obligations, no responsibility for others. I think it's time to live for myself." "Just don't shut yourself away," Henry warned. "At our age, that's a dangerous path to take." I nodded, understanding the wisdom of his words. It's too easy to succumb to the temptation of isolation, especially after experiencing betrayal. I spent the next few days thinking about a new direction in life. I wandered aimlessly around the house, sorting through old photographs and leafing through newspapers. But on Friday morning, feeling the walls closing in on me, I decided to go for a walk. It was a surprisingly warm day for late autumn. I headed to the city park, a place I had rarely visited in recent years. The park was located in the center of Marysville, with a picturesque pond, avenues of century-old trees, and cozy benches. I sat down on a bench by the pond, watching the ducks lazily gliding across the water. For the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. No worries about the company, no complicated relationships, no obligations. Just me, the ducks, and the clear sky above my head. "Excuse me, is this seat free?" A woman's voice interrupted my thoughts. I looked up and saw an elderly woman leaning on a cane. Her gray hair was neatly styled, and her face showed traces of former beauty. "Of course, please sit down," I replied, moving over. "Thank you," she said, sitting down next to me. "It's a beautiful day, isn't it?" "Yes, it hasn't been like this for a long time," and I agreed. We sat in silence, watching the ducks. Strangely, the silence wasn't awkward. It felt natural and comfortable. "I come here often," the woman finally said. "Ducks don't require much, a little bread, a little attention, and they never disappoint." I heard an echo of my own thoughts in her words. "Unlike people," I remarked. She turned to me. a flash of understanding in her eyes. Exactly. By the way, my name is Eleanor Prescott Rupert Ebbing, I introduced myself. Ebbing? Like the construction company? She raised her eyebrows slightly. Yes, it was my company. Now my son runs it, or tries to run it. Are you enjoying your well-deserved retirement? Eleanor asked. You could say that, I replied, without going into details. Do you have any bread for the ducks? She asked unexpectedly. No, unfortunately, I shook my head. Do you have any? I have a little. Eleanor took a paper bag out of her purse. Would you like to join us? We spent the next hour feeding the ducks and talking about the weather, the park, and Marysville. Not a word about families, the past, or painful topics. Just two elderly people enjoying a peaceful morning. When the bread was gone, Eleanor glanced at her watch. I have to go. It was nice to meet you, Mr. Ebbing. Likewise, Mrs. Prescott, I replied. And please, call me Rupert. Then you can call me Eleanor, she smiled. I'm here almost every morning around 10. If you ever want to feed the ducks again, I'll bring bread next time, I promised, and I kept my promise. The next day I came with a loaf of fresh bread. Eleanor was already sitting on the same bench, as if waiting for me. Thus began a new chapter in my life. Every morning we met in the park, fed the ducks, and talked. Gradually our conversations became deeper. I learned that Eleanor was the widow of a well-known doctor in the city and had two daughters who lived in other cities and rarely visited her. She taught literature, loved classical music, and categorically rejected modern technology. One day when we had become quite close, Eleanor asked, Rupert, what happened between you and your family? I looked at her in surprise. What makes you think something happened? I see the pain in your eyes when you casually mention your son or grandson, and I've noticed that you never talk about them in detail, unlike your late wife, whom you talk about with such love. I was silent, wondering whether to open up. But something about Eleanor inspired trust. Maybe her own openness, maybe the understanding in her eyes, and I told her everything. About Elliot's anniversary, about Vanessa pouring champagne on me, about the theft from my credit card, about Howard and Elliot's silence when I was being humiliated, about my decision to change my will. Eleanor listened attentively without interrupting. When I finished, she took my hand, a gesture that was both surprising and comforting. I understand you, Rupert. More than you can imagine, and she told me her story, about how, after her husband's death, her daughters gradually drifted away. How the older one, Catherine, had married a man who openly despised Eleanor. How the younger one, Lisa, was too busy with her career to visit her mother. How 3 years ago, Catherine had asked for money for a down payment on a house, and after receiving it, had practically stopped communicating. Last year on Eleanor's 70th birthday, her daughters didn't come, sending a card and a gift certificate instead. The most painful thing, she concluded, is realizing that your children only need you when they want something. Not as a person, but as an ATM or a free babysitter for their grandchildren. I nodded, understanding her all too well. And what did you do? The same thing you did, Eleanor smiled weakly. I rewrote my will, leaving my daughters only symbolic amounts. I bequeathed the bulk of my estate to the local library and an educational support fund, and I started living for myself. And how is it, living for yourself? It was strange at first, and she admitted. All my life, I had put others first. My husband, my children, my students. Learning to think about my own desires wasn't easy, but over time, it's liberating. I started going to concerts, reading books I never had time for, traveling, albeit modestly. And you know what? I realized that life doesn't end when your children stop needing you. It just becomes different. In the weeks that followed, Eleanor and I spent more and more time together. Feeding the ducks turned into walks in the park. Walks turned into lunches together. Lunches turned into visits to the theater and musical evenings. We discovered a shared love of classical music, an interest in history, a preference for simple but high-quality food. Eleanor helped me see Marysville differently. I had always perceived the city as a place of work, as the territory of my construction projects. She showed me its cultural side, a small but interesting history museum, a cozy library with an amazing collection of old books, sculptures hidden in the park that I had never noticed before. In turn, I told her stories about the buildings my company had built or renovated. I pointed out architectural details that would be invisible to the average passerby. I shared my memories of how the city had changed over the past 50 years. One evening, after a concert at the local art school, we sat in a small cafe enjoying tea and cakes. "You know, Rupert," Eleanor said, looking at me across the table, "I never thought that at my age I could start a new friendship that would become so important." "Me neither," I admitted. "After Marilyn died, I was sure that meaningful relationships in my life were over, that all that remained were duties and obligations to my family. And now? And now I realize I was wrong," I smiled. "New relationships are possible at any age, and they can be even deeper and more honest because we already know what we want and are not afraid to be ourselves." Eleanor raised her cup in a playful toast. "To new beginnings in old age." I touched her cup with mine. "To new beginnings." A month after meeting Eleanor, I received a letter from Howard. He wrote about the company continuing to sink into financial crisis, about Vanessa still being angry, and spreading rumors about me, about Elliot's attempts to save his marriage, but not a word of apology or acknowledgement of his own mistakes. Just a statement of facts and a hint that without my help, the company would go bankrupt. I stared at the letter for a long time, and then did what I couldn't have done a month ago. I tore it up and threw it away without replying. There were no more agonizing doubts, feelings of guilt, or the need to save people who didn't want to be saved. There was only confidence in the correctness of my decision to move on without the toxic burden of this relationship. The next morning, during our usual meeting, I told Eleanor about the letter. "You made the right choice," she said. "Some relationships cannot be healed, no matter how hard we try. Sometimes the best solution is to let go and move on." I couldn't have done that before, I admitted. The sense of responsibility for my family and the company was too strong. And now? Now I understand that I also have a right to respect and happiness. That I don't have to put up with neglect just because it's my family. Eleanor took my hand. "That's real strength, Rupert. Not the ability to endure humiliation, but the courage to stand up for your own dignity." At that moment, I realized that I had begun a new chapter in my life. A chapter in which I was not a lonely old man, abandoned by my family, or a former businessman who had lost his purpose. I was a man who found the strength to break toxic ties and start over. A person who had found a friend who shared his values and understood his pain. A person who had finally learned to value himself. "Do you know what I've realized over the past few weeks?" I said to Eleanor. "That self-respect cannot be obtained from others. It can only be found within oneself, by defending one's own boundaries and values." "Exactly," she smiled. "And sometimes that requires going through the pain of rejection and betrayal. But it's worth it," I squeezed her hand. "Definitely worth it," Eleanor nodded. "Because on the other side of the pain lies freedom. The freedom to be yourself without fear of judgment. The freedom to appreciate the present rather than clinging to the illusions of the past." We continued our walk in the park, and I felt a lightness I hadn't felt in many years. The future was unknown, but it no longer frightened me. After all, at 68, I had finally learned the most important thing: to value myself and my right to happiness no less than I valued others. And that was the best legacy I could leave myself.